Testament lesson is from the book of Leviticus, chapter 19, verses 1 to 4. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to all the congregation, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord, your God, am holy. You shall revere your mother and father, and you shall keep my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. Do not turn to idols or make cast images for yourselves. I am the Lord your God." Then from the letter of James, chapter 2, verses 14 to 18. "What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith but do not have works? Can faith save you? If a brother or sister is naked and lacks daily food, and one of you says to him, 'Go in peace, keep warm and eat your fill,' and yet you do not supply their bodily needs, what is the good of that? So faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead. But someone will say, 'You have faith and I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I, by my works, will show you my faith." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. It's my first week of seminary. 7 of us are in a small room on the 4th floor of Stewart Hall, an old stone building that back then was stale hot in the summer and steamy hot in the winter. The 4th floor had once been attic space, I am sure. It's a speech class, a required course in how to speak good, not use any distracting gestures, how to intone your syllables so that the point was heard, and so on. Very first thing, we were invited individually to go to the window, look out, and tell the others what we saw for 3 minutes. No notes, just talk. The instructor was Virginia Damon. Though it was slightly before my time, some of you may have heard of the old radio mystery show called The Thin Man. Virginia Damon and her husband did the voices for that show. She had a voice that was in the Maggie Smith class for richness and the Meryl Streep class for range. But the most remarkable part about her wasn't her voice, it was her ear. She knew just about all there was to know about pronunciation, timing, sound, and silence. From her, I discovered I have a dark L. We all have our problems, mine is dark L's. So, in this class of 7, we had a guy named Floyd Tompkins. Floyd was a Baptist. Floyd looked like James Earl Jones. Floyd sounded like James Earl Jones. And Floyd knew he had a star-quality voice and loved to turn it up a few notches for effect. Floyd gets up. He stands at the window, strikes a pose, and begins, "As I look out of this window, I see before me the richness of a spiritual landscape." That's as far as it gets. Virginia Damon is on her feet, walking around and holding her ears. "Floyd, Floyd, Floyd," she says. "Floyd, don't do that. That's not your voice. That's a monastery moan." Floyd stopped dead. "That's a stained glass voice." Floyd was not used to hearing this. Floyd traded on his massive presence and booming voice. But Virginia Damon, half his weight and a good 18 inches shorter, had a point to make. If you have a different voice in the pulpit than you do out of it, she said, no one will believe you. They'll think, well, he's just preaching. I think Virginia Damon picked on him on purpose. What she meant was that to be both understood and believed, you had to be consistent. We're not talking about technical things like pacing and projection. But if we're different people in public settings than we are in private ones, people will think that something's amiss. We all learned something from Virginia Damon just then. Hypocrisy. It comes from a Greek meaning to play a part, to pretend. Floyd was playing the part of a preacher. But more commonly, it's the practice of professing beliefs or feelings or virtues that one does not have. Falseness. Psalm 26 puts hypocrites in the company of those to be avoided, along with the worthless, the evildoers, and the wicked. Tough company. Jesus' main charge against the religious establishment wasn't that it was legalistic, but that it was hypocritical. It professed to love the law, but didn't care to love its author, passing by the deeper commandments of loving and serving God and neighbor. Watch out about correcting others' sins, Jesus warns. Hypocrites should take the log out of their own eye first, before they take the speck out of their neighbor's. Jesus captured the essence of hypocrisy when in the last week of his life he cried out, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which on the outside look beautiful, but inside they are full of the bones of the dead." There really is something about doing something and saying something else. It drives people nuts. This is perhaps the origin of the phrase, actions speak louder than words. It's why we tend to look down on some politicians. Some are, for some people, the embodiment of hypocrisy, purporting to serve all the people, but too often shown up serving the loud, the powerful, or the rich. Here's the faith aspect. A huge proportion of the population of this country professes belief in God, and yet do we act it as if it means anything to us? That reading from Leviticus, all those things we ought to do are listed, and I just read the first couple. They're all listed, but along with that is the recurring statement, I am the Lord. That's the part that makes what accompanies it so important. It's not just a matter of good practice to do those things. It's a matter of faith. So how do we find out about spiritual life as it's actually lived these days? One way is to look at people's trash. Investigators, weekly and otherwise, have gone through people's refuse for years to find out what's really going on. Does your trash can have empty champagne bottles or beer cans? Mail from investment firms or bill collectors? Old National Enquirers or old National Geographics? You get the idea. I'd like to suggest this morning there are less messy ways when we're looking at religion. I think we can find out about the Christian faith as it is practiced, found in life, so to speak, by looking at 3 books most American households have. The first is a Bible. Very popular book. Almost everyone has one. What condition is it in? Is it untouched or well-worn? Trotted out on ceremonial occasions or read daily? A place to put important papers or a source of life itself? We call it Holy Scripture. Maybe that's because holy means initially set apart. even though here it should be well thumbed. The psalmist waxes lyrical about the joy of attention to Scripture. Psalm 119, Lord, if your law had not been my delight, I would have perished in my misery. Your precepts have given me life. It's my meditation all day long. Your commandment makes me wiser than my enemies, for it is always with me. How sweet are your words to my taste, sweeter than honey to my mouth. Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. In Acts 8, we have the account of the Ethiopian riding along in his chariot trying to understand the Scriptures. He was reading in the car. Philip runs up to him and is invited to hop on and explain the message from Isaiah. And from there, Philip goes on to tell him good news, and the Ethiopian is converted on the spot. But just looking at someone's Bible can be misleading. Bibles wear out, they can be replaced, and not every faithful person turns a dozen Bible pages a day. But there are two other books of faith that are even more revealing about a person's spiritual life. The second book is a checkbook. This is a revered American book, if there ever was one, even if it's online. And we can look at there and see where faith comes in the scheme of things. We have income on the first of the month, say. What items get paid first? Mortgage, car, cell phones, groceries, Visa. Where does God's word come, if at all? Off the top? Or maybe if something's left at the bottom. This isn't to say that we can look at the checks we write to the church, or to other charities for that matter, and say that faith is a matter of tax deductibility. Far from it. A huge number of Americans are dedicated to and get paid for separating us from our money. The faith is embodied just as much, if not more, in how we respond, what we do with all of our money. There's a radical way of handling money that we find in the accounts of the first churches from Acts chapter 4. It says the people then all pooled their stuff, and everyone was served out of the common. I'm no communist, but those Christians certainly knew that their stuff was on loan from God, and thus their first duty was to God and then to their neighbors as themselves. So when we read in 1 Timothy about money, we can see it's a matter of faith how we handle it. Chapter 6. Of course, there is great gain in godliness combined with contentment, for we brought nothing into the world, so that we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with these. But those who want to be rich fall into temptation and are trapped by many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. So where does all of our money go? How much more above what we need do we buy? How much do we have to go through before we can appreciate that money does not in fact buy happiness and not even much contentment? But perhaps the best way to look at the Christian faith as it's lived is to look at how we spend our time. There is, after all, always more money. But there are only so many hours in a day, so many days in a week. And how we allocate this scarcest of all resources speaks volumes about our lives, our priorities, and our faith. So the third book of faith is our date book or calendar, or whatever we use to keep track of what we're supposed to be doing when. This too is a matter for God. The psalmist says, "But I trust in you, O Lord. I say, you are my God. My times are in your hand." And Paul adds, "Be careful then how you live, not as unwise people, but as wise, making the most of the time because the days are evil. So do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is." Same question here as with checkbooks. It's not really a question of whether we'll take a portion of one morning a week to come to church. Far from it. Again, a whole portion of Americans are dedicated to and get paid for separating us from our time. Their products, their causes, their interest in the age of celebrity, themselves spending time on those things. The faith is embodied just as much, if not more, in how we respond, in what we do with all of our time. You've heard before the statistics on how little time Americans spend with their children. The truth is we don't spend that much quality time with anyone these days. Time just hanging out, as people would say. Just being together with no particular agenda other than to listen and be heard. Hanging out, too, with God. Quiet time. Alone with the one who, as Augustine said, made us for himself. We like to profess things about all these books of faith, how valuable we think the Bible is, how careful we are with our money, how we spend quality time with those we love. But the research shows that we talk differently than we act. The research shows we're desperately ignorant about spiritual and biblical values, even though we say they're important. It shows that we spend far more money than we need on our own creature comforts. It shows that we spend far more time in either making money or in recovering from making money than we do enjoying the blessings of it. There's a word for this, and it isn't a nice one. But wait. I found something else in my reading. What I found was an idea from Jean Carr, a playwright, who said this: "We are the only animals that can learn by being hypocritical." We're the only animals that can learn by being hypocritical. We pretend, for example, to be polite, and then, eventually, we become polite. Isn't that interesting? It may be true. And if it is true, then perhaps God has left the back door to righteousness open just a crack for us. Come every week and see, as Paul reminds us, how people of faith act, how they love each other. We may just get the idea that something interesting might be going on, and we should check it out. What we might just wind up with is this: a people whose lives speak the language of faith, of hope, and of love. We wind up with a people who have no inconsistency between what we say and what we do. We wind up with a people we can, to use a heavenly metaphor, look up to. I'm prayerful that in the weeks that lie before us, each and every one of us will find the resources of these three books of faith useful for building up a better relationship with God and thus with each other. I would like to see this happen to where we truly can be said to be a city on the hill, a lamp of hope and love to a world searching for truth, for hope, and for a new way of living. May it be so for all of us, for God's sake.